Okay, gonna do a short video on some of the war gear. Actually, just to be specific, it's Poison versus Fleshbane. And this is relevant. It's relevant for Dark Eldar specifically, but it also really applies to Nurgle demons and Tyranids and probably a few other armies. Those are the two that I have that have a fair amount of this. But if you look at many of the weapons that have the Fleshbane USR, they're described as poisoned weapons, but they don't actually have the poison rule. So when you look at some of the war gear options that you can take, particularly for Dark Eldars, like if you're looking at a Talos and you want to know, do I want to take the Ichor Injector, which always wounds on a 2 because it's Fleshbane, or do I want to take Chain Snares, which give me Shred? The USRs really play a pretty big role here, because if you're fighting against anything that has normal toughness, then the Shred is probably a little more likely to inflict wounds. They're going to be AP2 because it's a monster, versus the Ichor Injector, which wounds always on a 2 and causes instant death on a 6, but on the event that you roll a 1, you don't get to reroll. This applies to some of the Dark Eldar weapons. When you look at it and you say, hey, do I want to take the Agonizer, which is going to be poisoned, or the Electrocorrosive Whip, which is poisoned 5+, or do I want to take a different weapon? Well, what does poison do for you? Poison gives you the ability to wound on a fixed number unless you would wound on a lower roll. So let's say you have an Archon who is strength 6 because he has Soul Trap. His Agonizer is going to wound on a 2 against pretty much all standard infantry, and he's going to get a reroll because it's poisoned. So you have to think about this, because if you're taking a weapon that has Fleshbane, and there are a few, those wound on a 2, but they don't get a reroll because they're not empowered with the poisoned USR. It's a small thing to consider. Urian Rackhart's another one that has it. He has an Ichor Injector, doesn't give him a reroll. He always wounds on a 2. If you have the Pansia Perverted Diabolical Plaything from the Homunculus Covens, it protects you against any poison weapon, regardless of the strength of the wielder. They only wound on a 6, but it doesn't protect you against Fleshbane, because Fleshbane is not poisoned. So it is a small consideration when you're taking a poison weapon to really consider what it does. The ability to reroll or wound on a fixed number versus Fleshbane, which always wounds on a 2, but you don't get a reroll. Now, often you don't need a reroll, but for some of the monsters, and I think the Talos is the biggest consideration here, the Chains versus the Ichor Injector, you're probably more likely to actually put down wounds with the Chains than you are with the Ichor Injector, because you're going to wound on a 2 at strength 7 against almost everything. And the Ichor Injector is more expensive, gives you instant death, but you actually instant death a ton of things anyways. Well, if they're toughness 3, you do. So, those are things to consider.